Hi, everyone. Welcome to Maximus Call-In Radio Show, episode 58. It's unbelievable. We've done so many episodes of this show every Thursday at 6 o'clock Pacific time. Thank you for everyone who's joining us on Clubhouse, Instagram Live, and YouTube Live. We always like to have it on multiple channels and mix it up every once in a while. I'm your host, Dr. Cam Sapa. I am the CEO of Maximus, who is sponsoring this show. I run a men's telemedicine company that provides a safe and effective way for you to double your testosterone levels, which we prove with at-home lab tests. In fact, we're so confident that it works that if your testosterone levels do not increase after doing a follow-up lab test, we will refund all of your subscription fees. You can check us out at maximistribe.com. We're available in 13 US states, and the theme of this show is to maximize your testosterone. And the reason is we think testosterone is one of the best markers of overall male health. And there are many ways of maximizing testosterone besides just pharmaceuticals, which we provide a safe and effective prescription medication for. But we also focus on health behaviors, which are nutrition, exercise, sleep, focus, and healthy, intimate relationships. So if you have any questions around that, I am a licensed clinical psychologist and psychiatry professor at a local medical school. So I work with mostly CEOs and VCs on optimizing their health and performance from mind to body, and happy to answer any and all questions related to that. We always like to kick off the show with a weekly unpopular opinion where I provide a contrarian view on things that are based in evidence or clinical practice. And then I love to take questions from the audience. If you have any questions about improving your health, working on your New Year's resolutions, feel free to raise your hand on Clubhouse. If you want to join actually on live on Instagram, feel free to, we can dual stream you, or just type in your questions if you are listening on YouTube Live. So this week's unpopular opinion, because I want to get more relationship questions, which are some of my favorite work to do in counseling, and actually a lot of the work that I do in my private practice. This week's unpopular opinion is that there is no such thing as unconditional love when it comes to romantic relationships. And in fact, the best kind of love is conditional. Now, I've asked actually a lot of my friends about this, and I always ask about this concept of unconditional love when it comes to your romantic partner. And everyone is a big fan. There is something literally romantic about someone who will love you no matter what. But if you think about it from a first principles perspective, it is a very unrealistic notion, and actually I would argue an unoptimal one. So first of all, if you just look very realistically, practically at any relationship, there are conditions. Right? I would argue that the overwhelming majority of relationships, in fact, there's an expectation of monogamy, right? And in order to maintain certainly a long-term relationship, a marriage, that's usually an expectation on both parts. Now, obviously, that's not always practice, which obviously results in a lot of turmoil and or separation, but that condition is there. And so if really there was unconditional love, you would still love the person, quite frankly, no matter what they do. And obviously that doesn't sort of pan out in reality. We do have expectations about what's appropriate and what's not, what's forgivable and what's not in a relationship. And those are essentially the conditions that we have in terms of how we expect to be treated and the conduct that we expect from our partner. Now, the challenge, of course, with having conditions in a relationship, though, is are your conditions realistic? Are they attainable for your partner to do? And is your partner obviously on board with those conditions and maintaining them over the long term? You know, the challenge is in the early stages of relationship when everything is lovey-dovey, you're in the honeymoon phase. For instance, there may be an expectation on your part for a certain frequency of physical intimacy that's doesn't even really take any effort on the part of your partner to do because it's natural, it's there, the desire is there. It gets harder when people are older, they're more tired, their testosterone and estrogen levels have decreased, there are children in the way, and so the expectation may not be met. And so there's obviously, there can be negotiation that can happen around that, or quite frankly, compromise if that's reasonable or not. Or obviously there's a lot of times where that's not acceptable anymore and leads to separation and divorce. And so it's quite common, in fact, for people to have conditions in terms of their relationship. But I would argue that if the conditions, and this is where I think it's a useful distinction. Are the conditions there for you, or are the conditions there for the other person? It's not a bad thing to have sort of self-directed, or if you will, even selfish expectations, but they cannot be all sort of for your own benefit. Versus having expectations for the other people, for the other person in terms of maintaining, let's say, their health, their well-being, is also very helpful and important too. Because having a balance between expectations for your own self and having a balance of expectations for the other person makes sure that it's not too lopsided or in your own favor, in which you're asking them to do all this stuff for you, but your conditions or your expectations don't apply to them. And if you really think about it, if you're a loving, compassionate partner, you should expect just as much of the other person, not just from the other person as well. Now, the question arises: how do you make sure that the relationship, if it is conditional, which I argue all relationships outside of a parent-child relationship, in which the child is obviously dependent on you, and that cannot be withdrawn from. You can't divorce your child for the most part, other than rare instances of legal emancipation. In the context of a romantic relationship, how do you maintain a healthy relationship dynamic? And ironically, a lot of one of my favorite principles from parenting actually really applies well here, which is the concept of balancing, of being an authoritative parent, which is balancing support and affection. My thesis around this is that you can only be as strict, essentially, as a parent or as a partner as you are loving, right? So if you think about the stereotype of the tiger parent, this is the cold but strict parent. And while that does work for getting your kid into an Ivy League school, I think a lot of times it leaves children with emotional neglect and often leads to quite problematic behavior, substance abuse later on in life. On the other hand, you have the other extreme of the warm, permissive parent, the one that is always very positive around the child, but really has no expectations, no conditions, does not push the child at all. Those children really do not become very conscientious, self-organized, driven kind of folks because, well, it quite frankly doesn't matter what they do. They can kind of do whatever they want, and their parents are still positive regardless. Obviously, the ideal is to combine both of those things, to be supportive and strict, but that my thesis is you can only be as strict as you are supportive. That love has to be the foundation for every relationship, right? But it's not unconditional love, meaning, if you act like a jerk, you're physically and emotionally abusive, I'm going to tolerate it. It's saying you as a human being have fundamental self-worth, and so I love and provide that. I provide that love to you as a foundation. But above and beyond that, there's expectations that I have of you, and it's not just for my own benefit, as I mentioned, but it's for your benefit as well. So my thesis is if you really love another human being, you should have expectations so that they can rise and achieve their own potential, right? Like if you have, let's say, a wife or a husband that's incredibly smart, but they're underperforming, they don't apply their intelligence in any way. And the reason, it's not because they don't think they can, or maybe they don't want to, it's because they don't have confidence in themselves. They don't think that they're actually intelligent. They don't think they have a gift to offer the world. But you see it and you encourage it, and you set an expectation of like, I really think you have something special to share. So figure out a way of sharing that, and let's figure out together how you can do that. And once they do, let's say maybe they become a tutor or a teacher, or they find a great job in which they can apply their strength, they're able to really thrive, right? Versus you saying, okay, you can kind of do whatever you want, and I love you no matter what, it almost really lets them down or lets them short, because it lets them be mediocre or lets them be weak and lets them, quite frankly, be avoidant of living up to the person that they can be. You really do want a partner who both ways pushes you to be the best that you can be, but not pushing in a judgmental way, like I said, in a selfish way, in a way that makes you feel less than, but or guilt trips you, I should say, but really almost encourages you to be the best that you can be. So let's talk about some very specific behavioral tactics that can be helpful in shaping behavior. So the first thing is always like consent, right? You don't want to manipulate people. You don't want to change someone who doesn't want to be changed. So the first thing, that if you are trying to change behavior is just to understand, are they on board, right? If you want your partner to quit smoking or quit drinking or whatever sort of behavior that you don't think is aligned, both for yourself, obviously if you get secondhand negative effects from it, or obviously for the health of themselves, you have to kind of see if they're ready in terms of their motivational stages of change. Are they in denial about it? Are they ambivalent about it? Or are they prepared and ready to take action towards that? That's really when you want to kind of intervene, is when they're ready and they're willing to have you help. Otherwise, you're fighting an uphill battle and you can't change someone who doesn't want to be changed. So let's assume that that prerequisite is there. They're ready to change and they want you to help them. The biggest mistake that people make when working with their partner in terms of changing is the inappropriate use of punishment and a reward. So behaviorism is all about reinforcement and punishment. And then there's two different types. There's positive and negative reinforcement, positive and negative punishment. Positive and negative does not mean good or bad. It means the presence or absence. And I'll give you 4 quick examples to explain these types. Positive reinforcement is pretty simple, right? It's the introduction of praise. Honey, you did a good job. Negative punishment is to not say anything at all. So if you're used to saying positive things, or let's say you're used to, I don't know, greeting it, it'd be to withdraw your attention or withdraw your, affection essentially from someone. Positive punishment is obviously if you say something critical, you're introducing a critical or something that discourages a behavior. And then, negative punishment is to take away something that is normally positive but discourages the behavior. So the biggest mistake that people make when they're working with their partner and working on something that they've mutually agreed upon in terms of changing is they use positive punishment far too much, right? In terms of they come home, the house is a mess, they've agreed that they want to have a clean house, and what do? They yell, they criticize their partner. Didn't we agree upon this? Look at the way you left things. You're a sloppy pig. And then, obviously makes the person feel down, less than, and frustrated. It's for the most part not a very effective behavior change strategy. Literally, whether you're working with children, dogs, or partners, the same principle for most people who practice behaviorism applies, which is positive reinforcement goes a lot farther. So in the rare instances, let's say, in which the house is kept clean, you reinforce that behavior. That works a lot better than the criticism, right? And so, but here's the thing that most people don't do well with positive reinforcement is that they focus positive reinforcement too much on before the action happens versus after the action happens. My philosophy, my hypothesis in clinical experience is you want to go light on positive reinforcement before the action happens, moderate during the action, and heavy after the action. So let's take an example here. Let's say your husband or wife walks in, it's time to clean the house. Now, if every time you do that, you're like, okay, it's time to clean, you start saying, wouldn't it be great if we clean the house? Let's encourage my husband to clean the house. And if you keep doing that, it's going to come off as nagging, right? Because they haven't done it yet. And maybe they're even thinking about doing it, but I don't know, they haven't put their briefcase down, or they're just trying to get a glass of water. It starts to get annoying. And so the better approach is to just light reminder, maybe you go pull out the broom, they can kind of see it, you haven't said anything, it's subtle. You start cleaning the house together and you're like, hey, isn't this great that we're helping each other out? That's a nice little bit of positive reinforcement. And then after it's done, the task is complete, reinforce the heck out of it and say, honey, I appreciate so much. I know you had a long day at work and you came and helped me clean the house. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. So that works a lot better to do it immediate. It's called immediate reinforcement, immediate positive reinforcement, to do it right after the task is completed, versus being too kind of prescriptive or almost nagging by doing it too front-loaded before the action has actually happened. Now, of course, you got to remind people or trigger people if they forgot, here's this thing that I want you to do. But it should be really light. It should be, not heavy in tone that comes off as annoying, because anyone doesn't like to be nagged. So really, really focus on positive reinforcement. Now, what do you do when someone does something wrong, right? As I mentioned, the biggest mistake that people make is they do positive punishment. They yell, they criticize, they guilt trip their partner. And like I said, it generally is not a very effective strategy. Sometimes, and you don't want to overuse this, you can use negative punishment. Punishment meaning you don't want that behavior to continue. So let's say in the case of you don't want your husband criticizing you so much because it obviously makes you feel less than. So instead of yelling back or yelling at your husband when he's critical, you're kind of like taking a small fire. Now you're making it into a big fire. Not a very effective, obviously, strategy in terms of, exacerbating the dynamic of your relationship. You can use negative reinforcement. And by that means sort of withdrawing your sort of attention or focus. So if they're being critical, you don't necessarily engage in the criticism. Now here's the thing: it's not about ignoring them. John Gottman's research, the Gottman's research shows that stonewalling someone, meaning like someone's talking to you and you're literally like, I'm not going to respond, or I'm going to leave the room and I'm going to pretend like you're not there. That's obviously a very immature coping mechanism. So that's not what we're talking about here. There is a subtle form in which, let's say your husband's criticizing you. You're like, okay, I hear you. To be honest, it's kind of hurtful. Why don't we revisit this conversation another time? And then you go do something else. So you're acknowledging the person. You're not ignoring them, but you're not sitting there and engaging in something that you don't want to reinforce. And that's why it's called negative punishment. Now, I would say in the relative balance of things, you don't want to go too heavy on this. You really only want to use negative punishment when there's someone who's kind of like engaging you and you can't stop it. Like imagine like a kid having a temper tantrum at a grocery store. That's a great example of like negative punishment. You don't sit there and give the child attention, right? You almost like carry on with your regular shopping and then leave the store, right? Because if you change your behavior or you give them attention, you're reinforcing bad behavior, and that's what you don't want to do. So really, I think about it like an 80-20 rule. Negative punishment should only be really used less than 20% of the time, and really in instances in which something bad is happening and you don't want to engage, you don't want to reinforce it. 80% of the time, you really should be using positive reinforcement to encourage your partner to do the right thing if it's something that, like I said, you've agreed upon, and to do it lightly at the beginning to remind them, moderately while it's happening in order to encourage them to continue, and then lavish the praise afterwards in order to get them to feel good about it and to do it again. So that's a very evidence-based behavioral kind of point of view in terms of how do you use reinforcement to shape your partner's behavior in a way that's obviously positive and consensual, in order to have a healthy conditional relationship in which you're getting both of your expectations met. Because in my opinion, in my clinical experience working with folks and couples, it's really important to be clear about your expectations, and to figure out ways of encouraging it in your partner. Because look, we're all human. We're never going to 100% meet the expectations of our partners. And so it's both up to us in order to live up to their expectations, but also up to the partner to create the psychological and behavioral and conditions in which people are more likely to do the right thing. And you can actually influence a lot of behavior by just using a lot of positive reinforcement and selective negative punishment when appropriate. All right, so it's a little bit of behaviorism 101 in terms of relationship dynamics and conditional relationships. We'll take questions. I think we. I think it's connecting to audio. Guess in a minute. Zoom or. All right, while that's still going on, it looks like we have some folks raising our hands on Clubhouse. Feel free to raise your hand and ask any questions. Oh, I think we got our Zoom. Hello, can you hear me?
Hello. Yep.
Hey, hey there. Hold on. For our clubhouse folks, we just got our guy on Zoom, so we'll pause for a second. How you doing?
Doing good. Can you hear me well?
Yes, sir. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm excited to chat.
What's going on?
Um, in terms of questions,
Yes.
okay. I guess my first question is about kind of like keeping a routine and being consistent with it.
Mm-hmm.
Like long term, I feel like every time like I've developed a strong routine, whether it's like a morning routine, a wake up routine, gym routine, there's just always been like a terrible fallout
Yeah.
that has like a very quick like loop of destruction.
Mm-hmm.
So I just feel like nothing I've done has like worked long term. I've had like good short term runs, but like
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to get advice on that.
Yeah, it's a great point. So you're asking about you're able to put routines into place, but you're not able to keep them up. Why? What typically throws you off in your experience when you mentioned like these sort of disasters happening?
Okay, so I feel like it's usually say like I'm working a late night,
Mm-hmm.
for example. That's one. Two, just like I go on my phone, social media can take over for like an hour or two. I won't even know it. I get in bed and I just can't sleep.
Right.
I'll try to take like melatonin, that won't work. So I think one of those three. I've on the top of the year, I realized like I was smoking and drinking
Mm-hmm.
ridiculously last year, but I cut that out completely. Like I made a commitment and I just went through with it. So I've been sober for like 47 days now. I
Fantastic.
feel proud. Thank you. So that's not disrupting me anymore. But I think the other stuff, I'm like, I get so annoyed with like how much it stops my progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you're making fantastic progress. Especially, it's not easy to be sober for 47 days, and so that must feel fantastic, and also feel very frustrating when you get thrown off by things. So, what does it typically get in the way of? Like, what are some of the routines or habits you're trying to maintain that late night work or late night social media use has thrown you off kilter from?
Yeah, so I'm trying to, for example, like one of my main goals with waking up early, like around the say like 5 o'clock mark, is I just know I will feel better when I do so. Like in general, I've tried it. Like I always feel better throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
I feel more productive. I feel more clear minded. I feel like I can get like a good head start on my wellness.
Mm-hmm.
So like I can stretch, I can walk, I can journal. But I also like I'm faithful and I'm Muslim, so I love waking up that early to also
Yeah.
pray, and that all kind of like gets taken away, and I kind of wake up and I'm like, first meeting, oh my god, this
Yeah.
feels terrible.
Yeah, I feel you. Well, mashallah for being good about practicing your faith and your rituals. I actually think they're an important part of psychological well-being and a morning routine. Um, Now, here's the challenge that you're facing. I think a lot of the stuff that you're describing is quite ordinary in the sense of, or not unusual in the sense of what gets in the way of doing the right thing. So here's my first question, and then we can dig into a little bit of problem solving. What is your routine to make sure that you have all of your routines in place? Or what is your habit that you have for making sure that you're doing the right habits? How do you know you're doing them versus you're not doing them?
Hmm, that's a wonderful question. So in the past, what I've tried to do to address that is like literally my calendar blocked out every night,
Mm-hmm.
like reflection on routine, reflection on like day activities,
Yeah.
and then weekly I set up like a meeting with myself on Saturday where I'm like reflecting on the week. But those times, like, oh, I never like abide by those times.
Yeah.
I just let things get in the way. I have late meetings, or like I think most of it I have control over, and it just so nothing else outside of that I have right now actively doing.
So why? So you're doing actually the right thing, right? Which it sounds like you do have a system in place for checking up on it. It sounds like there's some reflections at the end of the day, end of the week. But what makes you skip it? It's because what work gets too heavy. It's too onerous to do them. It's boring. You tell
Ooh,
me.
okay, yeah, great. I'm glad you brought up boring because I think it's like I have a much better handle on work now, and I really I prioritize like doing wellness stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I think at some point I do get like just tired, like I'm just like fatigued,
Yeah.
and I'm like I don't have the energy to do this. I think boring is another thing. Like I just feel so I don't maybe tired, bored from like working all day that I'm like I'm not gonna sit here and like reflect right now. I just wanna do something else. Like, and I might pick up my phone. I might try to eat. I might try to push myself to like go to the gym or something. But worst case scenario, like I'm sitting at home and I'm like, all right, let me just try to pass time, do something else.
I feel you. So I think we've identified the first problem there, right? Which is you're trying to do a habit in which your motivational level or willpower is probably at the lowest, right? Kind of late evening, you're tired, you've kind of exhausted yourself from a day of work. You probably almost like don't want to focus because your focus has kind of been overspent. So I generally don't like trying to um, bash your head against the wall, right? Like if you're talking about how you have this event scheduled on your calendar and you just keep missing it every day, you got to take it off your calendar, right? So here's a really helpful trick that I encourage my clients, which is you don't want to miss too many times in a row. So I'll give you an example of this. We actually do coaching as part of our platform. If you're interested, you can check it out at maximustribe.com/discord. And one of the rules of thumb we have is we encourage people to track streaks, right? So maybe one streak is just how many reflections have I done this week? You know, has it been 1, 3, 5 days? Now, if they miss it, let's say you miss the streak today, you'd start counting in backwards. You can say -1. Miss 2 days in a row, -2. Now, if you start missing a certain number, and you can make up whatever that is, let's say more than 3, or sometimes we do more than 5 days in a row, you have to change your goal, right? You don't want to, finish the end of 2020, have a calendar full of reflection times, and you basically just ignore the shit out of it, right? That's not a goal. That's a goal that you set a long time ago. That's how most people treat New Year's resolutions, and they fail to do them. So a little bit of accountability on your part is saying, look, this goal that I have is awesome in theory, but in reality, right now, I don't have the ability or the willingness or the setup for me to be able to succeed at it. So if I miss more than 3 to 5 times in a row, then I need to adjust the goal. Now, it doesn't mean you need to get rid of it altogether, but you need to change it because whatever you're doing is not working. And the worst thing in the world to do is to repeatedly fail because it lowers your motivation, and quite frankly, it's not getting what you want. So here's what I would suggest: make it easier, right? So the first thing you have to start is, in order to keep a habit, you need a meta habit, or what I call a keystone habit. And that's essentially what you're talking about, right? You need some time to check in every day and be like, am I doing my goals or not? And we'll talk about those goals in a second, but this is the goal keeping, goal tracking, meta habit, keystone habit that's really critical. Right now, doing a reflection every single evening doesn't really work for you because you're too tired. So what I would suggest is cut it down, and also try to do it maybe at a time when you're not so exhausted. So I would actually suggest, I don't know, you tell me if this works for you. How would it feel to do a very brief check-in? Like, we're talking less than a couple minutes. I generally recommend 4 minutes for the Keystone Habit. And the reason, by the way, I picked 4 minutes is because it's such an unobjectable number, right? It's like, it's very hard for anyone to say, I don't have 4 minutes a day. I'm like, really? 4 minutes? Like, that's like a bathroom break. It's not even 5 minutes, right? So the question is, can you schedule 4 minutes? And when do you feel best? Is it the morning? Is it the afternoon? When are your energy levels and motivation the highest?
Yeah, it's definitely in the morning for me. And then if I'm able to, like today, I was able to hit the gym and like really eat. Like, I feel great right now. Like, and that's why I was able to come on. I was like, I feel good. Did the dishes, I ate. So I'd say early in the morning, and then if I'm able to like do some self-care like right after work and not like be bombarded with things, then I would feel good again, like around like the 8 to 10 mark.
Perfect. So here's what I would suggest. Shift your keystone habit in terms of your reflection on your habits to the morning time when you feel the best, you feel most motivated, you're not burnt out from work, and you're most likely to do it. So second, keep it short. It doesn't need to be 15 minutes. It doesn't need to be 30 minutes where you're doing some serious life reflection. All I want you to do is whenever you wake up in the morning, it doesn't have to be first thing. If it's first thing, that's great. If you want to go hydrate, go walk 10 minutes in the sun, do whatever it is, do your prayers. Set up your morning routine the best way possible. But sometime in there, give yourself a couple minutes and just check in really quickly on the last day. Like, just look back on yesterday, right? And look at whatever behavior that you're trying to track. So one behavior that you told me that's important to you is the ability to go to sleep early in order to wake up early. Is that correct?
Yeah.
All right. So all you have to do is just ask yourself, what time did I go to bed last night? What time did I wake up this morning? And how much did I sleep, right? So last night, went to bed at 1. I woke up at 8. I got 7 hours of sleep, let's say. All right. Now I've tracked that. And then do a little bit of reflection. Why did I go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning? Well, it was because I was feeling restless and I went on social media and messed around for an hour between midnight and 1 o'clock. All right, now you've identified the cause of the bedtime procrastination, right? Now there's an underlying cause too, which is like, what was it? Oh, it was the feelings of restlessness, and it kind of numbed that emotion by, allowing me to hyper-focus on some Reddit thread. Okay, great. That's the avoidance mechanism that it was serving. Now, the question is, let's say I just made that up, but let's say that was true. Maybe it's not too far removed from your actual experience. What would you do differently tonight, knowing that you're going to be tired, you're probably going to be restless again, because the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. But how do you prevent going down the social media rabbit hole from 12 to 1 o'clock tonight?
I feel like I need to make sure that when I get in bed, I'm already like tired, which is usually the case, but sometimes I'm just like up, and then I cannot have like my phone in bed. I usually, I think not having my phone in bed also helps. I guess those two things can help.
How do you make sure that you're tired by the time you get to bed?
Ooh, good question. I don't really know. I know people have suggested like reading. I haven't really done that, reading before bed. So I feel like whenever I try to read at night, it does get really I guess boring is like the right thing. Like I can't read much at night. I get tired. I guess reading can help.
Well, reading can help, but if you're talking about the problem is you want to tire yourself out, you should probably do some physical activity. Now, obviously, it's late, so I don't know how practical or safe it is to go out or do whatever. But I actually am really, really a big fan of nighttime walking, as long as, like I said, your environment's safe and you're able to. Obviously, that may not be practical for some people, but for a lot of people, taking a 10-minute walk, even up to a 30-minute walk right before bed, does tire them out. But it doesn't tire you out like doing a workout, because it's obviously low intensity. But it just, gets the circulation going, makes your legs a little tired. And people tend to fall asleep quite well after a nice little walk. So if you can do that, that's great. If you don't have the opportunity to go outside and, you still want to do a little bit of, you want to get the restlessness out, right? Say, if that's the problem, you're restless. Do a little bit of home workouts. You can do push-ups. You can do sit-ups. You can do a little challenge for yourself. You're like, I'm going to do 50 push-ups a day. I'll break it up into, 3 sets of 16 or 17. And that's going to be my nighttime routine. Do some prayers, wash up, and then I'm going to go to bed. So come up with something that kind of like gets the restlessness out, if that's the problem. And then I love the second part of what you said, which is stimulus control. If I slide into bed with my phone, I'm not going to be able to control myself. That's true. It's probably the same for me and most other human beings. So if you know that's the case, beforehand, right, as part of your bedtime routine, just put your phone on silent, notifications off, and put it somewhere far away, like not even within reach of bed. Make sure your nightstand's far away, or put it on your table that's not within a reaching distance, and say, look, the bed is a sacred space, right? It's only for sleep. or intimacy, but I'm not going to sit here and scroll on my phone while I'm in bed. So that's a very helpful rule. So that's essentially what I would jot down at the end of your little reflection journal, right? So if we go back to what we were talking about in the morning, you got 4 minutes. So what do? You reflect on yesterday. Last night I stayed up too late on social media, and I only slept from 11 to 8. I got 7 hours of sleep, which is not bad, but honestly, I wish I got up earlier and I wish I got a little bit more sleep. Plus, I messed around and wasted a lot of time. I know why, because I was restless and, I didn't have a good outlet for it. And this time around, my solution is I'm going to do a little bit of light physical activity, walking or push ups, whatever it is, and go to bed at midnight this night, 1 hour earlier. And I'll set an alarm to remember to do that. It'll go off at 12 and be like, all right, in bed, lights out. And then I'm going to not tempt myself by making sure that my phone, while I'm doing my bedtime routine, is far away from my bed so I don't slip into comfortable, behavioral patterns and just scroll through social media. So I would write those things down in the morning, right? And now you have a plan. And you have this plan while you're motivated, while your energy's better, while you're not freaking exhausted. And so when the evening rolls around, you're doing this at, like, let's say you said 10 o'clock in the morning, right? Mm-hmm. So when nighttime rolls around, you have your plan. And ideally, wherever you wrote this down, whether it's a notepad or a digital notepad, look at it, right, as before you go to bed. You're like, okay, what was my plan? My plan was no phone in bed. Let's get a little of my restlessness out, and then 12 o'clock midnight, I'm out like Cinderella, and I'm gonna put my phone aside and I'm gonna follow the plan, and then see how that goes. The next morning, right, tomorrow morning, you're gonna check in again for 4 minutes and be like, did that plan that you and I came up with right now, did that work? Did that not work? Let me iterate it again. So that's going to be the foundation. And we'll see. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't work. Maybe it'll take 3 more iterations of these conversations for us to figure out what is going to finally work for you. But we have to create that foundational keystone habit, that's what I'm saying, a few minutes in the morning to do that little check-in. Doesn't have to be heavy. Come up with a plan, try it, see if it works, make adjustments, and go forward. So let's say the next morning you do it and you're like, hey, you know what? It worked pretty well. I did a 10-minute walk before bed. I ended up going to bed before midnight. I put my phone aside so I didn't use it in bed. It worked perfectly. The only thing was, I don't know, walking outside was really cold. It took me a little time to fall asleep because, I don't know, I was like too cold when I got into bed. What am I going to do differently? All right, I'm going to put on my hoodie, dress warmer when I go walk, and that way I'm going to be nice and cozy when I go to bed. It's going to not take me so long to fall asleep. So there, you've just done an iteration so that you're tweaking, constantly improving essentially your strategy and improving your bedtime routine so that you have maximal success. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes so much sense, and it's I feel excited to actually try this out and see how it plays out, and then hopefully, I think I always notice about myself whenever I gain some momentum towards like these types of habits, I end up doing really well for like, it can go on for like a few days, a few weeks, and then the fall at some point just something goes wrong,
right?
And I think that's when like everything feels like it falls apart, and I'm like, right, I'm not able to like get back to it for a few weeks. So
this is a fantastic point, and this happens to everyone. And here's the secret to it. The secret to it is to not fall off the wagon, but to adjust it without giving it up, right? So this is what I said. If you've fallen off for more than 3 to 5 days in a row, you change the game plan. So let's say in general, let's say your goal is to like, I'm going to sleep before midnight every night. You're good about it, right? You're like I said, you're doing your walk. You're not scrolling your phone in bed. You're just crushing it. Something happens. You get stressed. Work gets really busy. Now you get thrown off. Now you start skipping it. You start missing your goal for a couple days in a row. Now what everyone does is they just give up at this point. If not outright forget that they had a goal in the first place, because I don't know, maybe a few weeks, to your point, have gone by. The better way of doing it is every morning you're still checking in. But like I said, if you're like, I'm missing this too many times in a row, so either iterate, right? You're saying, okay, the walk is not working. I got to do push-ups because I'm too anxious right now because of work. I got to like really exhaust myself, and the old way wasn't working. I need something new. So great, tweak it. But if it's still not working, like even with all the changes or adjustments that you're making, or maybe you're making it more flexible and be like, hey, with the amount of work I have, 12 is not realistic. It's going to be 12:30 now, right? So adjust the goal instead of failing over and over again. And if that doesn't work, then it's okay to say, hey, for now, I'm going to adjust the goal so that it's actually meeting my reality. So let's say you've slipped all the way back, you've regressed, and you're going back to sleep at 1 o'clock, which is what you used to do before you started all this. But for whatever reason, it is what it is, right? Like you're just too anxious, or you got too much work, or you're just not able to pull together the resources to do it. But if you still check into your journal and say, you know what, even though it's not my preference, but realistically, that's all I got right now is I'm going to bed at 1 o'clock. I would like to go to bed, sleep earlier, and all the benefits of morning time, like you said. But realistically, that's where so I accept my goal. I accept my reality as I'm a 1 o'clock guy for the time being, right? And I'm not going to feel bad about it. I'm not going to beat myself up over it. I accept this is my current reality. And what happens is you don't avoid it. You don't beat yourself up, and you don't run away. That's what most people do, is they feel like a failure. And when you feel like a failure, you're like, forget this goal. I'm not going to even think about it because I don't like feeling bad. And that's how people get off track. Versus, hey, you know what? I'm not able to do this right now. This is I'm going to change my goal. And so this way, you're never actually failing. You're never actually failing. You're saying 12 is an optimal goal. It's an ideal goal. This is my perfect reality. But right now, I'm a 1 o'clock guy, and I've changed my goal because I've given it 3 to 5 days. In reality, it's now 1 o'clock. So there's really only two solutions. You either work hard and you achieve your goal, or if you're not able to, you lower your goal to where it is meeting your reality. But either way, you're never failing because you're allowing the goal to adjust to your reality. And the beauty of that is it reduces the guilt and the beating yourself up, so that results in you forgetting about it or slipping off the wagon for weeks. And what allows that to happen is, okay, let's say now 4 nights in a row you've gone to sleep at midnight. It's not your preference, but you've accepted that. This is your reality. Fine. It is what it is. On the 5th night, maybe you feel better. You had a good dinner with your family. You had a strong week, and you're like, you know what? I'm ready to get started again on tackling this goal. Let me reduce it to 12:45 tonight. I would eventually like to get to 12, but I'm not sort of in that place in my life right now where I can make the huge change. 15 minutes this time. Let's not be too ambitious. And then you can start working your way down. And the beauty of this is small incremental progress. The Japanese have a term for this. It's kaizen. Kaizen means small continual improvement, 1% a day. So it's not bad to make giant leaps if you're able to achieve them. But if you're not, you got to scale back and be like, all right, 15 minutes at a time. That's all I can do right now. So the goal, and I always tell people this, is don't set goals that have a less than 80% chance of success. So when I work with clients and they set a goal, I ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that when we meet again, you're going to be like, Dr. Cam, I succeeded at this. If it's anything less than an 8, I don't even allow my client to make that goal. I'm like, 7, 6, like, okay, tell me why you don't think it's likely to happen. So we either got to anticipate ahead and come up with ways of overcoming that barrier, or you need to lower your goal and make sure it's realistic. Because here's the thing, you don't want to fail too much. Like I said, in terms of your goal, it disheartens people, it makes them disillusioned, and it makes them try less. I would rather people even undershoot a little bit, crush their goal, because like I said, 80% likelihood of happening. And then you can always adjust upward. You know what I mean? Like if you think, okay, all I have to do is go to bed 15 minutes earlier, I'm pretty confident, 8 out of 10 I can do that, great. Then the next night, do 15 minutes more. It's always easier to make your goal harder. It's much harder to continually fail and still be motivated to do it, in my opinion. So you want to reward yourself with success over and over again. and keep up a streak as long as possible. So does this? I know this is like a little bit of a maybe an unusual way of a concept for a lot of people, but does this make sense in terms of either like constantly adjusting the goal so that you never really fail?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I think, especially, I think a lot of my thinking has just been like black or white. It's like you do it or you don't.
Right.
You achieve or you fail. And I think this is like more of a spectrum type of viewpoint where it's like, you set up something. If it doesn't work, iterate, pivot, iterate, and it's also aligns more with like an entrepreneurial mindset, which I relate a lot with as an entrepreneur as well. So I think I'm able to like make stronger connections on that, and yeah, it feels better, and it feels right in terms of like a good approach to like think about this. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm really glad that you identified the core challenge, which is you're right. It's black and white thinking, right? If you have this binary view of you either succeed or you don't, you win or you lose, that's hard to live up to, right? And we're all human. We're all so fallible, right? Even myself, I have like a goal for what time I go to bed every night. I'm not perfect about it, right? And it just doesn't help to beat ourselves up about it. It's much more helpful to be like, look, I'm gonna make small incremental progress, or if I'm not, that's okay too. That's the thing that people sometimes forget, right? It's not okay to feel like a failure all the time, right? And if you're like, man, I really wish I could go to bed earlier and I'm not a morning person, it's worse to have that cognitive dissonance and be like, every day I fail, every day I'm not able to do it. That we have to cut out, right? In order to not crush our self esteem. The better way of doing it is to maintain that keystone habit, just like I said, at 8 o'clock in the morning. And you don't write, I'm a failure every morning. That's not about it. What you do is, like I said, if you miss it more than three times in a row, 5 times in a row, you say, this is my new reality. I accept reality for what it is. I'm a 1 o'clock guy. And eventually work your way up to being like, okay, now I'm at the point where I have an 80% confidence that I can change that. But in the meantime, I accept it. I'm not a failure. I'm succeeding at my current reality, even if it's not my ideal reality, right? So I think that's the thing that really, like, if you think about it, people have to have a foundation in which they feel good about themselves in order to achieve, right? It's very hard when you feel like a loser or a failure to do something different. Now, maybe there's some extreme, like I've hit rock bottom and I feel failure, but that's not really, that's an exception, right? On a day-to-day basis, like I said, positive reinforcement works a lot better than positive punishment in terms of beating yourself up. So let's get out of this failure mode that I think you've been stuck in for too long, and either rise to the occasion of achieving some of your goals that have, like I said, an 80% likelihood of succeeding, or adjust your goal downward and be like, yep, I accept this as it is. I feel okay about it. I feel my self-worth is safe with me. And then I can use that place of security about how I feel about myself as the foundation for me to start making positive changes. And I'm going to do that through a consistent morning check-in routine that I'm going to try to be really good about. And don't beat yourself up if you miss a morning too. You know what I mean? Just do your best around that. But as long as you keep up that meta habit, that reflection, that keystone habit, at least you won't go weeks like you have before in terms of missing. It'll be a day, maybe 2 days at most that you'll miss, and be like, all right, time to get back on track. No time for beating myself up. Inhale, exhale. All right, let's go.
Awesome.
All right, great question. Did you have? I know you mentioned you might have sent in some other questions that you wanted to ask as well.
I do. I have a lot more, but I don't know if you wanted to spend time talking about other stuff. I don't want to take up all your time. But
How about this?
I can ask another question.
Why don't you ask one more and then we can take one from the audience?
Okay, fantastic. Okay, all right. I really appreciate you, by the way.
My pleasure.
Okay, cool. So yeah, my other question is about I guess, and it connects with this in different ways, but creating more energy to be like a high performer, especially trying to manage a day job and trying to build a business after hours.
Yeah.
And I think this also like affects my sleep and whatnot, but I think as an entrepreneur, like I have the ability shift timelines, to like manage projects better, to like make my hours. But I think what I've noticed is that after work, that like thread of like tiredness persists, and it's like I think I also lose motivation to work on the project. So I guess kind of just, if broadly speaking, like to connect it to other people, if you want to work on a side hustle,
Right.
how do you like create more time and energy throughout your day to like make it happen?
Yeah. So you have a full-time job, if I'm hearing you correctly, and then on top of it, you're trying to do this entrepreneurial side hustle nights and weekends.
Yep.
Yeah, so God bless you. That's awesome. But it's also really hard to do. I think most people are exhausted after a 9 to 5. Um, and it's not that it's impossible, but it does take, I think, two particular things to make that happen. I'll give you an example. I was listening to Ronnie Coleman. They were doing a video of him in a locker room. And most people forget that Ronnie Coleman was a full-time police officer. That was his 9 to 5 job. And then after work, he trained as a professional bodybuilder, harder than almost anyone, and was Mr. Olympia like I don't know how many times, 6 times I believe. And they were interviewing, and everyone he was like, man, everyone makes the excuse that you can't like be a pro athlete and have a full-time job. And he's like, well, guess what? I'm the exception to the rule. And the reason is like, well, maybe he is an exceptional human being. You know, he really is in some ways, maybe genetically. But I also think he was exceptional in his psychology, right? His mindset was like, yeah, everyone says you can't do this, but I don't see why. The reason, though, that I think was the first secret to his success is he had a why, right? So for Ronnie Coleman, being the best bodybuilder in the world was such a motivational drive for him. It wasn't nice to have. It wasn't like oh, it would be cool if I did a little bit of bodybuilding. It was like the thing that he lived for. You know what I mean? And the police job, I'm sure he enjoyed it too, but it wasn't sort of his core purpose in life. But he liked it because it obviously paid the bills. He enjoyed the work. There's probably some meaning around that too. But bodybuilding was his raison d'etre, his reason for being. And so you have to really connect and even sometimes remind yourself, you're like, why am I doing this? I already work 9 to 5. So I'm going to spend my nights and weekends instead of relaxing, chilling, enjoying on more work. Why? What is motivating me to do that? And connect with that. Connect with that on an emotional level. Write it, put it on your refrigerator, put it in front of your computer, put it somewhere where you can see and you can remember your reason for being. Because if you don't connect with that, you don't remind yourself of that, and you don't feel it in your gut, then when it's 6 o'clock, you're dead tired, and it's easy to just turn on Netflix, you're gonna be a human being and you're gonna make that choice, right? So the thing that I've seen that differentiates the truly the best of the best is that they have an unbelievable amount of motivation, even competitiveness, and a drive to win. And I think that some of it is like really individual. Like there's some people who are just born that way. But I think for a lot of people, it can be developed if you have a why that's meaningful enough. And here's the honest truth of it. Nobody likes to say it, but Ronnie Coleman also had a great quote. He said, everyone wants to be a bodybuilder, and ain't nobody want to lift no heavy ass weights, right? Which is like great. Like if you ask someone like, hey man, would you want to train when you want to go to the gym after work and be, you know, like bigger? Oh, I think a lot of guys would say yeah. But then if you ask them, if you want to be the best in the world, and it means like enduring the pain of lifting 600, 700 pounds, it physically hurts, most people really wouldn't want to do it. Not day in and day out, right? And so you have to ask yourself, is the sacrifice worth it? It's not just, do I want to be rich? Do I want to have, this cool business? Do I want to be in charge? Do I want the fame? Do I want to be an influencer? It's not about that. Now, that's the positive side of it. Does that, hopefully, whatever it is that's driving you, does that motivate you enough? Great. But the real question is, the second question is, what am I willing to sacrifice in order to get it? Am I willing to lift the heavy ass weights? Am I willing to give up my evenings? Am I willing to give up some of my social life? And you have to say yes to that with all the completeness of your parts of you, all the selves of you. If you have ambivalence as a part of you that's like yes, the other part of you is no, you're going to have a hard time, because when the going gets tough and you're really stressed and you're really tired, you're going to default to the easy decision, which is to not work on your side hustle, right? So let that be part of the check-in process too, is not just what is it that's motivating me? I choose to do this side hustle. Nobody's making you do it. And what am I willing to sacrifice? And you can say that with a straight face and say, yes, I'm willing to give up my evenings. I'm willing to maybe not hang out as much. I'm willing to give up these other things. But that's my choice. I own that. I accept that. I want to do that. Then that creates the psychological foundation for you to be able to go and do that in the evening. So that's my recommendation on the psychological side. Let's talk a little bit about the physiological side, especially because you're talking about something that is going above and beyond, which is, look, you're a human being. Like, we all have limits. The thing that I would emphasize is recovery. You have to really be obsessed, I would say, about recovery if you're going to work 2 jobs. And I'll tell you this as I'm someone who works 3 jobs, right? I have a full-time job running this company. I teach 1 afternoon a week at a medical school, and I still have my private practice on the weekends. But I really try to be obsessive about sleep. I like literally encourage everyone in my company to track their sleep. And that's how it helps me manage it, is I'm like, the only way that I allow myself to do stuff outside of my primary job is I have to take care of myself. So I go to bed early. And also, if I'm going to do stuff in between, let's say my full-time job and my side job, I will rest. So one thing you can do is just, like, for instance, do power naps. If you finish your job at 5 o'clock, now, you don't want to sleep too late in the evening, but I think like a 20-minute power nap is totally fair game. Come home, eat your dinner, rest for 20 minutes, and you're like, all right, I'm going to put in 2 hours on my side job. But if you're exhausted, you got to rest and you got to take care of yourself. So that's one way of doing it, is to introduce enough break recovery in between your full-time job and your part-time job. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to set aside a dedicated day. That's what I do with my private practice. I'm like, it's too busy in my full-time job for me to try to do this in the evenings and come home and see patients. It's a mess. So what I do is I just set aside my Sundays, and I'm like, Sundays are patients' days. That's when I see my patients. Yeah, there's a sacrifice in terms of a little bit of my social life, but that's my choice. I like the benefits. It's meaningful work, but I don't let it interfere with my, full-time job. And the rest that I get on Saturdays, there's a 1-day cushion between my full-time job and my part-time job where, Saturdays I go out, spend time with the girl, sleep, rest, do my shopping, eat. And then that way, when Sunday comes around, I feel recovered, not only from Monday through Friday, but I had my fun, I had my rest, and now Sunday I'm like, all right, I'm refreshed. I can give it an 8-hour day, in fact, on my side hustle. And that gives me the recovery in order to do that. So that's my advice to you, is you have to be like human, right? You have to acknowledge your humanity and say, you can't just work 8 hours and then do 4 more hours of work after that like you're a robot. You gotta make sure that you build in either intra-day rest within the day, or intra-week rest, so rest within the week, like taking a day off between Friday and Sunday, and making sure that you're fully recovered in order to give the sufficient energy and attention to your side gig so that you can be successful at that too.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's really fantastic advice. Yeah, you just got me thinking a lot about, I definitely need like at least 1 day off completely.
Yes, always.
And I think that makes so much sense to like just clean, hang out, eat, like just family, stuff like that. And I really like the idea of like dedicating another full day. Like if it's a Sunday, then I'll make it on Sundays. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate kind of the other ideas around power naps. I think naps don't work for me, but I think doing other, like working out, really works for me to like get more energy. I just feel more energetic afterwards. So I love that. Thank you. Yeah, this is really, really helpful.
Do what works for you. By the way, power naps don't necessarily mean you have to be asleep. Just resting your eyes, getting into a deep physiological state of restoration, lowering your heart rate, can be restorative in a different way than sleep. But that can work. And same thing, if it doesn't exhaust you and you're not too tired after your workout, gets your kind of blood pumping and energy going, then that's totally fine too. So definitely experiment, do what works for you. But I'll tell you, everyone needs, even the best entrepreneurs need at least 1 day of rest. The Chinese notion of 9-9-6, where they work 9 to 9, 6 days a week, they still have a day off, right? And even though they're working 72 hours a week notoriously. And in every single religion, there's always like a day in which you're supposed to rest. And I think there's a good reason. We've learned from thousands of years of trial and error, it's very Lindy, as Taleb would call it, that we all need just like one day, basically every 7 days, give or take, a few to rest and recover. I think that's true for workouts as well. Even if you're working out 6 days a week, you really want to take that seventh day where you just chill, let your body recover. So figure out that all throughout. Now, I think the most elite way of doing it is to figure out how to do that in short, medium, and long-term cycles, which is one full day of rest, a couple hours, here and there, and then within the day, you should even be taking like 5 to 10 minute breaks, right? Like one of the things I always say is 5 to 10 minute breaks every 25 to 50 minutes in between your meetings. Get up and walk. So ideally, you want to do short, medium, and long breaks, and that way you have a mix of recovery, and it's not just one day a week. Because who knows? Maybe that one day you got to do shopping or something else, and it doesn't feel like a break. In any case, great questions. I'm glad it was really helpful. If you want to come back and ask more next week, feel free to do so. Thank you everyone who joined us on Instagram Live. Thank you for everyone who joined us on Clubhouse. I'm sorry I didn't get to all your questions. I prefer actually going in depth and doing kind of a little bit more coaching rather than Q&A. But if you have questions, feel free to submit them in advance, and that way I'll prioritize them for the radio show. You can submit them on Discord. As I mentioned, our community is at maximustribe.com/Discord. There's a Dr. Cam radio show. You can submit questions. Victor will actually archive them and save them for the next week, and we'll put them at the top of the queue so that I can answer them for you. And feel free to join our community, by the way. We also just answer questions more asynchronously in terms of typing responses. But it's always fun to do this live because then I can problem solve with people as I did with this caller today. So thank you, everyone. Hope you have a very healthy, very happy Thursday. I will catch you all next Thursday, same time, same place, 6 o'clock on your favorite social media channels. Thank you. Take care.